Thank you. Thank you very much. So tonight it's anthrax, smallpox, vaccinations, and the mark of the beast. And the cover slide that you're really looking at is a photograph that was taken of the dome of the Rotunda building on Capitol Hill, the nation's premier legislative facility. And I'm going to share with you now how this, in fact, photograph totally is predicted and prophesied in the Bible. You see, it says in Isaiah 10:1, it says, "Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed like medicines." What you're looking at is a picture of the Greek god Mercury, who in his right hand holds the insignia of medicine, the medical logo, which is a snake wrapping around a tree, such as a tree of life. And in his left hand, you see that he's holding a bag full of money that he's placing down as a bribe on top of legislators' desks as they are penning legislation and ultimately prescribing for the American public forced vaccinations. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees and that have written grievousness which they have prescribed. Isaiah 10:2 goes on. It says, to turn aside the needy from judgment. Isn't that the case? When I testified and I had this opportunity to briefly counter question Centers for Disease Control, Food and Drug Administration, National Institute of Mental Health officials before Representative Shays on April 13, 2002. And the question was on the table at that moment, should we give these folks an additional $75 million to further investigate the apparent links between mercury toxicity? Now remember, this is a picture of mercury. Mercury toxicity spread through thimerosal, which is an ingredient, a stabilizer, sterilizer in vaccinations. Should we give these people an additional $75 million when I'm about to show you in a couple minutes a classified document that had already proven that this was linked to this autistic spectrum disorders and the whole horrific array of neurological damage that has been inflicted upon our youth today? I said to the meeting, to the hearings committee, and to the people who I was asked to cross-question, wouldn't it make more sense before we give these people an additional $75 million to clean the foxes out of the hen house, so to speak? Well, the meeting was immediately stopped. The hearing was stopped by Representative Shays, who was chairing the committee at the time. He said, Dr. Horowitz, that's not an appropriate question for this hearing. He says, this is perhaps a question for an additional meeting somewhere else, some other time. And he says, I happen to know personally the people at CDC, FDA, and NIMH, and that they're wonderful people, and that they're great organizations, and that your question is out of bounds. To turn aside the needy from judgment, they need to be judged and that they're not, and to take away the right from the poor of my people. There's a man who's sitting in jail today, Alan Yurko is his name, because he was alleged to have beaten his child, his infant, when in fact he did nothing of the kind. He simply followed the physician's prescription, the medical deity's laws, and prescribed vaccinations. And ultimately his child, as I'm going to show you tonight, suffered from what is very common, a sudden infant death syndrome, which the post-autopsy findings, the result from autopsy, are virtually identical to shaken baby syndrome when you get vaccine injury. This is what they allege, that he had shaken his baby to death, when in fact he had simply taken the child, the infant, for vaccinations. His rights as a poor man have been taken away. He sits in jail tonight in Florida, allegedly a perpetrator of shaken baby syndrome, and that his wife Widow may be their prey. In fact, widows all around, in fact, single parents all over, I hear probably from 2 or 3 a month, who are under social services and welfare systems, and ultimately then come upon the question of whether or not to vaccinate, and they're told that if they don't vaccinate, their children will be taken away from them. The widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. That's precisely what Isaiah 10:2 says that is actually unfolding today in the realm of vaccinations and public health policies. Isaiah 10:3 continues, "And what will ye do in the day of visitation, you public health officials, and in the desolation which shall come from far?" God's judgment is coming to America. Most people understand that today. God has blessed America. God continues to bless America. The problem is, Americans have stopped blessing God. "To whom will ye flee for help in these days, and where will ye leave your glory?" When it turns out that we find out more than we already have found out enough, that the vaccinations and the public health policies that are around this whole issue of forced immunization, or forced vaccinations, I should more correctly say, whittling down the rights of people, free people, to have the religious convictions, God's word that stands, that says to keep the blood pure and keep the seed from being mixed, which is totally violated when you inject foreign RNA, foreign DNA, foreign proteins from where? Bacteria, viruses, fungus, yeast, chicken embryos, bovine feces.